Each and every year, video games keep looking better and better, and a core technology driving video games looking so good these days is ray tracing. Hi, I'm Alex Battaglia from Digital Foundry, and I'm going to take us through ray tracing in video games at 3 different levels of expertise. To truly showcase the visual benefits of ray tracing, ASUS have provided us with the world's first 4K 27-inch OLED gaming monitor with a 240Hz refresh rate and support for HDR. And to take full advantage of this monitor's potential, we've got our hands on this awesome PC rig provided by our friends over at AWDIT. If you're looking for beastly rigs and affordable top-tier components, be sure to check out their website. Links for both in the description. For the first part of this explainer, I'm talking with Nash from IGN.
Hey Alex. I'm primarily playing on console, so like a bit more of a casual gamer, as much as you can be, whilst working at IGN.
So can you tell me a bit before we start, what you know about ray tracing?
I know it makes things look really good in video games. It has something to do with light and how light behaves in a digital space. So I've only experienced it a couple of times, but never like on a PC like this where it's running like with everything. I'm excited today to see what Indiana Jones, a game that I think already looks amazing, what it's going to look like with all the bells and whistles that this 5080 provides.
Yeah, right now we're looking at the game much like you saw it on consoles, where Indiana Jones actually, even in just running at 60 FPS on console, still had ray tracing in it.
Right.
With a PC though, you don't actually have, especially one with an RTX 5080, you don't have to choose between frame rate and resolution or ray tracing or not. You can actually turn it all on and get the benefits of full frame rate as well as, full ray tracing. And let's look over here actually at this, and I can show you exactly what that looks like. So right now, this is the game much like you saw it.
Yeah, see, I mean, it looks good. It looks great. It doesn't look bad at all. They still look like edible little croissants or whatever they're called.
And let's turn on the full ray tracing.
Wow, that's so much smoother as well. Like even I think the first thing I noticed is the table where it's catching on the edge there, the gold inlay.
Yeah, the highlight.
Yeah, the little light coming off.
So ray tracing is essentially, much like films, trying to capture the way light enters a camera lens.
Right.
And in this case, it's catching the light coming from the outside window here, from the sky, and some of the sun too.
Yeah.
And bouncing it off here in a reflection that comes back into the camera. Previously, graphics were done through a technique called rasterization. Kind of a long word, but it's basically like the world exists already as a painting, and we're bringing that into a 2D image. That's what rasterization does. It's like kind of like a texture of the world, but not the full thing. Yeah,
like almost like a flattening of the image, rather than it having like all of the like divots that like that table looks like it's got. The grain and the kind of weathered look to it that the light is also picking up.
Yeah, and rasterization, a lot of the lighting that you do see is actually driven by like the texture of the material.
Yeah.
Here you can see this worn, what is this, cloth on this chair here. But when we turn on full ray tracing, you can see it actually gets a lot of the sunlight bouncing around on top of it too. That is a really large difference that we're seeing right here.
Yeah.
And other combinatorial technologies are being used to make ray tracing at this fidelity run in real time.
Right. So this is the reason that this looks like it does now isn't just because of one ray tracing technology. There's other stuff that's going on.
Precisely. In combination with the ray tracing of the scene here, there's also DLSS in use, which is called deep learning supersampling.
Right.
And that takes a lower resolution image for performance reasons. The game's actually running at a lower resolution here, and then it blows it up to a high res image. This is a 4K 240Hz monitor, and the game here with DLSS is actually running before DLSS is applied at 1440p, so a much smaller resolution. Here, it's bringing out all the details as well too. There's a technique called ray reconstruction, also on right now, which is another enabling factor to make this run in real time.
Okay, so ray tracing is one technology. DLSS is another one that works with ray tracing, and then there's ray reconstruction, which is a DLSS technology, or is it another one?
DLSS ray reconstruction is used to clean up the noise in the image.
Right.
There's only so many rays the GPU can process, and if I showed you what that image looked like, it would be just a mess. It's just tons of sparkle everywhere. You could barely even make out lines and whatnot.
Right.
Ray reconstruction, as a part of DLSS, comes in here and cleans it up so that it's a completely stable image, even though it's running in real time.
Okay.
And denoising technology to clean up a ray tracing image has existed for a long time. But ray reconstruction is a more fine-grained version of that actually uses machine learning running on the GPU. So it's like an AI program that knows how to clean up images. It can recognize shadows. It can recognize reflections. It can recognize even the sunlight bouncing off the wall here. And it can say, oh, I need to clean up this pixel in this way.
Right. So that GPU, which is like, look, it's huge. That's almost, that's like got a computer in the computer.
Yeah.
That is mad.
Yeah. DLSS is running on special hardware in a GPU called a tensor core. It's basically a special unit in the GPU that is particularly good at running AI, or machine learning, as it's called. And it's used in this case here to supplement ray tracing and make the image look crisp, clean, and also run at a high frame rate because it's running at a lower resolution.
Right.
As I've just shown, I hope you can now actually understand a bit more about ray tracing and all the other technologies that I showed off.
I do. I am in debt to your expertise, Alex, because that really, I hear those terms, ray tracing, DLSS, and I'm like nodding quietly, hoping nobody was going to ask me a question if I actually know what it's about. I'll now know what to say, and I'll be like, yeah, well, because it's running that, right? And hopefully I'll be able to convince them that I know my stuff.
Well, I'm glad I could help. Coming to the next part of this explainer, I'm joined by Ellen from Outside Extra.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. What do you know about ray tracing?
Well, I know the concept of ray tracing, and it's sort of like about tracing where rays of light go within a video game so that it can like accurately display that. So especially in games where, you know, there's a day-night cycle and things like that, and so the shadows and stuff will change. But I don't really know fully how it works. It's like smoke and mirrors.
In Cyberpunk here, we're playing the game without ray tracing enabled, much like people would have played it on console, for example. And here we're by the water's edge, and there's a lot of things you can see in a typical rasterized game. All of the reflections there are done with an effect called screen space reflections. So they're already a little bit, you know, you can see them flickering a bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, you move the camera down, they all disappear.
Right. I've never noticed that before. That is so wild.
Yeah, it's a typical screen space reflection error that ray tracing is hopefully going to get rid of. So let's turn that on right now. And this is how it looks with ray tracing.
That looks like actual water. And look, and they're like, the reflections are moving as the ripples are hitting that's completely different.
Yeah, in this case, reflections are being shot out into the world, and what they do is they rebound off the water and they look for another place that sees where that ray of light will go and test it, and then says, okay, we'll shade it this color. And that gives you the appearance of a reflection on a moving body of water.
That's magic.
Ray tracing isn't just reflections, of course. It applies to other aspects of lighting, like shadows. So here we're looking at this grass. This is typically how it would look in a game with rasterization. Now let's add ray trace shadows to the image.
Wow, yeah.
So you can see all the fine detail added in where each individual leaf, each little stem, all gets shadows that move as well when the plants move themselves too. Unlike other effects like shadow maps, ray tracing works on a per pixel level. So anything that you can see will be represented in the lighting the same level of granularity. Pixel per pixel. That's kind of what you get, these really fine little tiny shadows.
It's the shadows like on the leaves that I'm just spotting as they move as well. That is wild.
They're pretty incredible looking, yeah. Okay, so let's go inside one of these little hovely, I don't know what you'd call these here, huts or something like that?
Yeah,
little sheds by the edge.
Yeah.
Now we're going to show the effect of adding in ray trace lighting from the sky and the sun bouncing around the scene. A big part of ray tracing is that it can represent types of light that rasterization graphics can't do very well, such as light bouncing around the scene, or as well as light coming from things with a very large surface area. In this case, the sky is huge.
Yeah.
So you should see actually a lot more than what we see. In this case, when you go in here, the game uses another system to try and represent that, but it has a low level of fidelity. You'll see light kind of here. Everything looks almost of a same color tone.
Very flat.
Very flat, gray. Objects are not very well grounded here. This character looks like they're floating a bit because there's a limited amount of fidelity that can be achieved via rasterization. Now let's turn on ray trace lighting from the sky and bounce lighting from the sun.
Yeah, I'm not seeing as huge a difference.
but not too much.
No.
And the reason for that is because in this game, the secondary lighting that is added in via ray tracing is still done in a, I would say, a more simplified manner. It is getting some extra lighting from the sky here that you can kind of see in the difference, but it is only tracing one bounce, very limited, and it's still falling back to some rasterization systems to get some of the lighting in the scene. So rasterization can be combined with ray tracing in a thing that's called hybrid ray tracing. If you actually want to ray trace nearly all of the image, we typically call that path tracing. And let me show you what that looks like.
Okay. Oh, wow, yeah. No, I'm seeing like definite difference there. Like the shadow is different here. It actually is like, you know, filtered light almost coming through that doorway as well as the direct sunlight, yeah.
You should see a lot more around here. The woman who's lying on the mattress on the ground here, instead of before where she kind of floats on the mattress and the mattress itself kind of floats over the ground, here you can see that she's very much so attached to it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shadows, fine detailed shadows coming off.
Yeah, it's the shadows like on the mattress, like on the little lumps of the mattress. You can see that that's a huge difference as well. And the fact that it's so sharp there, the line, whereas like the further away, like the shadow is caused from, it's slightly more blurred as it would be.
Such a big difference though requires a lot of horsepower. And that's where you kind of have to add in and use other combinatory technologies to make it run in real time. And here I've been running the game right now with DLSS on, but we're gonna turn it off and show some performance to see what it's like without DLSS.
Okay.
So here we are in one of the more famous locations in Cyberpunk 2077, the market here. And we're playing the game here at native 4K on the RTX 5080 without any of the ray tracing on, none of the path tracing, no DLSS. It's a good looking game, I would say. It's probably some of the best of the last generation, but you can already see that, one, the frame rate, we're in the 40s here. All of the lighting, just
yeah, it disappears. As soon as you look down, they're like, oh, you're not looking at it. So
yeah, it doesn't exist. Yeah. But let's make this look a lot better by using full path tracing. Here, you have a try.
Yes. Yeah. So is this is kind of without all the settings on. This is a rasterized. If I go down, there we go, it goes. If I do that, I will never, ever unsee that in any video game. Or
as you're saying, this is the game running in native 4K.
Yeah.
TAA on, so no DLSS.
Yeah.
I would say a really good looking game, but out of like 40 FPS or so, and all the glaring issues you just saw, like you just look down here and
yeah, they're all they went, there we go, yeah. No object permanence in Cyberpunk. But I'd love to see this with everything running, but with no DLSS and see how well it does. Oh, it's chugging a little bit. Wow, wow.
It doesn't need much introduction, but as you can see, this is running native path tracing at native 4K using the game's temporal anti-aliasing. No DLSS is being used here. That frame rate.
If I get into a big firefight, I don't think I'm going to do very well.
Path tracing at native 4K is a huge, huge power drain on a GPU in terms of memory, in terms of processing power, and you're just kind of seeing an RTX 5080 and a wonderful GPU struggling at native 4K to do that.
Yeah.
So let's add in DLSS here, which should get a very similar image quality, if not even better in a lot of aspects, as well as increasing the frame rate.
Okay, this is more like it. There we go. Look at that lovely smoke rising out there. Love it. Everyone's moving at a normal speed.
No, here you're essentially multiplying the frame rate many times over by first running the game at a lower resolution using super resolution from DLSS. It's running internally at 1080p and then being reconstructed up to a real native 4K. And then DLSS frame generation kicks in and multiplies that frame rate over by taking 2 frames and inserting generated frames in between them. And in this case, inserting 3, multiplying the frame rate by 4.
Yeah, if I look down, yeah, the light's still going. They remember that the lights are all there. That's great.
Yeah, this is kind of like the preferred experience, obviously. Maybe one day we're running all games in 8K with path tracing on some future GPU, but for the here and now, technology like DLSS, ray reconstruction, frame generation, super resolution, together with the path tracing make a fully playable experience. Coming to the last part of this explainer video here on ray tracing, I'm joined by Alex Donaldson of VG247.
Hello, hello.
Correct me if I'm wrong, You do know a bit about ray tracing, don't you?
Totally. I use this. I've reviewed quite a few of these cards. I don't think I'm as granular as you are. Like,
But you have a pretty good rig, don't you, at home?
yeah, I'm currently running a 5090, so that's about as good as it gets. Yeah, so I like the power.
Even a little bit better than this RTX 5080 in
Yeah.
this rig right here. And here, I wanted to bring up Black Myth Wukong, essentially because this is the game without full ray tracing on. And I would say, just walking around the game world here, it is already a gorgeous looking game. And it is using a form of ray tracing that Epic termed Lumen. It combines things like global illumination, reflections, all into one, and renders the entire world this way. So it already looks really, really good, but it is rendered in software. That means it doesn't use the RT cores in a GPU. So software Lumen is kind of a compromise for running on consoles, but we've got an RTX 5080 here. Let's go forward and see what that looks like in comparison. All right, so here we are back with that full ray tracing. You see the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right, where it's initially small, but once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Ray tracing is actually, in this instance, tracing against triangles. Before it was tracing against something called sign distance fields, which are like these amorphous blobs that don't really cover dynamic moving objects like characters. And now it's actually tracing the triangles on his body, but it's also super expensive to do, right? This is RTX 5080 here, full ray tracing, 4K. We already saw the game was already running. It was heavy earlier, but now it's even heavier now, right? And like, you've probably seen that in a lot of games. Yeah, in the case of UE5, it's also particularly important because almost every single thing in this engine scales with resolution. Nanite, which drives all the crazy amount of ground detail here. I mean, just look at it. It's ridiculous how much detail there is on the ground here. All that's driven by Nanite. The triangles on the ground are constantly changing because their level of detail changes with Nanite all the time. All that stuff's really, really heavy. And on this older version of Unreal Engine 5, actually, it's potentially more heavy than it needs to be. And the reason for that is because UE5 was made at a time when hardware ray tracing wasn't necessarily going to be the future of the industry. They still didn't know yet what was going to happen. Since then, software is going to be evolving. Software is going to evolve in the future some more. And Nvidia has actually come up with a new technology called RTX Mega Geometry, which is a pretty cool thing, where it fits the way ray tracing is done on the GPU hardware into the way it's presented in a software style to the game.
And that's the big story for me, is we're reaching this point where has become a fire and forget thing. If the game's got it, I'm turning it on. And I think that is where the evolution has been really, really, of the games that I've played over the years, which have been many, that's the big evolution going into the current hardware.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for that. So on the hardware side, each and every single generation of Nvidia GPUs specifically, they always increase the amount of triangles that can be ray traced against. They double it usually. All these kind of technologies on the hardware side have made it so that games run better. But on the software side, Battlefield 5, it was the first ray trace title.
Yeah.
Do you think devs have learned a lot since then about how to do it? They definitely have.
Absolutely.
And things, oddly enough, something like the way Lumen's done is a very efficient way of things that we've seen also in Battlefield 5. Devs have also been increasing where to apply it, how to make it run the best. You have things like Spider-Man on console, which is running it at 60 hertz. People have been pushing it on the software side. And now, like you're saying, with the hardware being so up there, we can actually play it in real time with incredible fidelity, much better than we saw in 2018.
Games with quite a variable frame rate can potentially feel much better when you're using DLSS as a result of the GPU taking on that load of frame pacing. So Can you tell me a little bit about that?
You're basically talking about hardware flip metering, which is a thing introduced with the RTX 5000 series GPUs, where this title is actually not using the latest version of DLSS. Right now, DLSS ray reconstruction is not on. It is not using the latest DLSS 4 version of frame generation versus this is actually the old one that you've probably used on something like an RTX 4090 or earlier. And in this case, hardware flip metering makes it so that when you turn on something like frame generation, which is currently on right now, instead of the CPU deciding what the, I would say, millisecond per frame is, where the frame is being inserted in, now actually that's done on the GPU side of things. And that makes it so that when you insert many multiples of frames, this is just inserting one frame in between two traditionally rendered frames. If you insert now 3, for example, The old system probably would have had trouble making that actually look smooth on a display, especially nowadays when games are getting so much more CPU limited. This is actually a good example of a game that can be CPU limited at times when you turn on the full RT option, and so many games are CPU limited.
Well, any game that's got a lot of simulation, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I've been reviewing Monster Hunter Wilds, and that is a game with a lot of simulation parts, and so that's CPU bound, right? Like in the end, because the thing that's slowing the game down is not the visuals, it's how much stuff is being calculated, you know, in the game world. And I guess that speaks to what we sort of touched on a little bit of the idea of diminishing returns, right? In terms of graphics. And so taking anything off the CPU is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. DLSS frame gen specifically has been actually quite a lifesaver in a lot of titles where you may have something like an RTX 5080 or a 5090, but the thing that's holding you back is your CPU. And traditionally in the past, there's almost nothing you can do about that. But now you actually have a way to increase fluidity in a game where you otherwise wouldn't have it had before. Kind of another diminishing returns thing here is that the game already looked really great, and now it looks even better.
It's transformative, really.
Yeah. And in the future, there'll be technologies that will leverage machine learning running on the GPU, on its tensor cores, to just make the base game look better, even before DLSS comes into the equation. And we actually saw demos of it at CES running in Half-Life 2 RTX, was the neural radiance cache. This game right now, it's bouncing multiple rays around the scene to get the lighting information around. And that's very, very expensive, even on a big GPU like this. But what if you use machine learning to essentially infer what some of those rays would have actually done, and you cut down the cost then on the GPU actually having to have traced those rays in the first place. This neural radiance cache will probably be applied to future Unreal Engine 5 games, I'd imagine, in some point in the future, if not other games. And that should make ray tracing, like we see here in Black Myth Wukong, run even better.
The other thing, so there's that argument from people. The other argument I guess you hear quite a bit is the idea of fake frames a lot. And then we also hear the idea of, well, it's not native. I only want to play my games at native resolution. And I guess the thing that I would say, and I'm sure you can expound on this, is the first game I remember, you know, is being Death Stranding, for being the game where actually sometimes, in some scenarios, the upscaled image, so to speak, could actually look a little bit sharper than the original image, because the original image was this console compressed texture where for the PC version they didn't necessarily put in uncompressed textures. Yeah. Yes, it's not real, it's not native, but actually if it looks as good as or better, does it matter?
Yeah, I think that's the general trend in real-time rendering in the first place.
It's funny because sometimes when you get this stuff, an image can be too clean, but it doesn't step over into that mark, you know what I mean? It looks like, if you were to turn everything off and tell me this was native and it was just extremely well engineered, I think someone who doesn't necessarily know what to look for would absolutely not know the difference.
But an important part is, of course, how does it feel, right?
And this comes right to multi-frame generation, right? Where obviously with this game, we're not using that. But the thing about MFG is that is a technology that does have a limit on it in the sense of it's how a game feels. So yeah, if you've got a game that's running at 40 FPS, you could put MFG on and get it up to maybe 90, but it's not going to feel like 90. It's not even going to feel like 60. It's still going to feel like 40. And I think that's an important thing for people to reckon with, really, and understand, is that the idea behind this is you have a powerful card and a well-optimized game that's going to run at a good frame rate anyway, and then you use this to make it feel even better and look even better on the eyes. And that's why it has to be a marriage of technology, right? In terms of the marriage of the raw rasterization power and the power of this technology. And it's why I facepalm a bit when I run into people who say, yes, these new GPUs have been announced, but I'm not interested if the raw raster power uplift isn't X%, because that's all I'm interested in. I'm not turning the rest of this stuff on. And I'm like, these things are designed to exist together.
Yeah, there's only so much raw rasterization power can do. For example, a really good point is lighting. Increasing the amount of just generic compute rasterization power a GPU has won't necessarily make rasterized graphics look that much better. For example, a shadow map running at 2K resolution versus one running at 4K resolution, it may be 4 times more expensive to compute that 4K one, but it doesn't look 4 times better. Yeah. Right? So that is a waste. It makes much more sense to do things in a granular way, and ray tracing is actually extremely granular. It shoots out a ray into the environment and it says, let's see how this place is lit and shadowed. Whereas with rasterization, it would have to render the entire world from another camera's perspective to even get that shadow information in the first place. It is just a lot more efficient way of rendering. In terms of atmospherics, it just really elevates things to the next level. And it is the way, as I described earlier in this explainer, it's the way it's done in film. Film industry moved around, sort of 2010 or so, away from the traditional way of rendering that we do in games like this, or previously before these games. And now they're always using path tracing in film. And that's the kind of thing that the future of rendering is going to be. We're going to be moving towards that filmic look and everything.
Path traced on console, once we, as those machines move towards, that's what PC is always a glimpse into the future, right? That's why I want a game on PC in that sense. I want to be gaming on the Ferrari equivalent or the Porsche equivalent or whatever, where consoles, maybe you get a PS5 Pro and it's a nice BMW, but it's not a Ferrari. That's the exciting thing actually, is seeing everything align more in this direction. Because obviously when we talked about BF5, when Battlefield 5 was a thing, we were on the last generation of consoles, the idea of path tracing anything there was impossible, right?
No, and before I actually saw Cyberpunk, I didn't think it was necessarily doable in a game that had AAA production values. So it just goes to show how you can be constantly surprised at the rate of evolution in real-time rendering. And I think, it's incredible what the plateau we've currently reached and where we're going to be going in the future.
It's the classic question, right? In terms of, we talk about the future. I know this technology is going to get better. Apart from more triangles, what is the future of ray tracing in terms of how this is going to grow and push forward in terms of our visuals of our games?
Well, it's not just going to be about visuals. That's the interesting thing. Ray tracing is just a way to sample the world in 3D space in a way where you don't have to have visibility of it. That's the way to describe it. And you can use that not even just for visuals. Games right now are primarily pushing visuals in it because we're in a visual medium, but other games, and some that are going to be coming out in the near future, are going to actually be using ray tracing for base gameplay elements. We already saw some games using hardware ray tracing like Returnal to do sound propagation in the game world. You can turn that game on PC and use your RTX card to get better sound. We're also seeing a game like Doom: The Dark Ages, which is going to be using ray tracing for its lighting. It's going to have full ray tracing and path tracing to have a gorgeous experience like this one, but it's also going to use ray tracing to do hit detection in the game.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and it's a first-person shooter, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we're going to see it not just being used for visual purposes. It's going to make the interactivity in our worlds better, actually. But when it comes to visuals, there are a lot of lighting phenomena that are still very expensive to render. I always think back to Splinter Cell, like shooting the lights out of that game to make a gameplay thing. I think that's all the future of ray tracing, and that's enabled by the fact that now every GPU out there that's going to be sold supports hardware ray tracing. And as soon as developers have access to those GPUs, they're going to make it the base part of their game. And they're going to design gameplay systems around it, like we're going to see in Doom: The Dark Ages.
That's exciting. I had no idea about that Doom thing.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, the arguments I used to have about hit scan, Halo 3 and stuff. Maybe we finally fixed that.
We finally fixed it. Yeah, it'll work a lot better now.
I guess that's the exciting thing from a design perspective when I really think about it. Like, your first thought with a technology like ray tracing always goes to the visual. But actually, you think about it, light puzzles have been a part of video games since time immemorial, right? Like, Mirror Shield and so on and so forth. But it's exciting to think that stuff's really rudimentary, but it's exciting to think about all the implications, be that the stuff that's in your face, like a light puzzle in Indiana Jones or whatever, and the stuff that's hidden, like the hit tracing. Like, the idea that this can actually impact things on a much deeper level than the superficial is really exciting. And I guess it shows that if this technology can be leveraged for more than just eye candy, then that's even better.
Yeah, it's a paradigm shift in the way computing is done, much like machine learning is, and it's going to be very useful for games of the future. Well, thank you for joining us for this ray tracing explainer video, and I hope you learned something along the way. If you want to learn more about ray tracing or GeForce RTX 5000 GPUs, check out our reviews at IGN, Digital Foundry, and VG247.